Night of the Howling. I had been looking forward to this weekend for weeks. A rustic cabin deep in the woods, found through some obscure listing online. The plan was simple: hiking, fishing, and a break from city life with my friends. They were set to arrive the next day, so I decided to get there early and enjoy a peaceful night alone. It sounded perfect, at least at first. The drive up was longer than I expected, winding roads stretching endlessly through the countryside. After passing through a small town called Oak Ridge, I followed a narrow dirt road marked by a rusted sign that simply read, "Woodland Cabin Rentals." I drove for miles, the trees growing denser with every turn, blocking out the last bit of sunlight. The further I went, the more remote it felt, until finally I saw it, nestled between towering pines. The cabin stood in eerie silence. Stepping out of the car, I felt an unsettling stillness in the air. The cabin was old but charming, with a worn wooden porch and a large stone chimney. I carried my bags inside, the floorboards creaking underfoot as I explored. It had all the basics: an old fireplace, rustic furniture, and just enough electricity to keep the lights on. But the isolation was intense. No phone signal, no Wi-Fi, and the nearest neighbor was probably miles away. By dusk, the sun disappeared behind the trees, casting long shadows across the clearing. I started a fire in the hearth, its crackling warmth filling the room. But as the evening wore on, I couldn't shake the growing feeling that something was off. I told myself it was just nerves. Being alone in the middle of nowhere can do that to anyone, right? Around midnight, the howling started. At first it was distant, almost like a low wail in the wind. I dismissed it as coyotes, maybe wolves, even though I'd never heard anything like it before. But then it grew louder, closer, the kind of sound that sends a chill up your spine, making you feel like something out there is watching you. I locked the doors, double-checked the windows, and tried to brush it off. But the howls continued, each one more piercing than the last. And then, as if on cue, the power flickered and went out. Darkness swallowed the cabin. For a few seconds, I stood frozen, the only light coming from the faint glow of the embers in the fireplace. I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously peered outside through one of the windows. The woods were still, but the howling was now deafening. Whatever it was close, too close. Suddenly, I caught movement in the tree line. Dark shapes darting between the trees, their glowing eyes reflecting in the beam of my flashlight. My heart pounded as I realized these weren't just animals. They were massive, unnaturally large, and their eyes held an intelligence I couldn't comprehend. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight, when something slammed into the front door with a force that shook the entire cabin. The howling turned into a frenzy of snarls and scratching as if the wolves, or whatever they were trying to claw their way in. I grabbed the fire poker, clutching it like a lifeline, my knuckles white with fear. My breath came in ragged gasps as I backed away from the door, my eyes darting between the windows, expecting any second for the glass to shatter or the door to burst open. The wolves slammed against the wood again, harder this time. The sound of their claws raking against the walls filled the cabin, a relentless scraping that made my skin crawl. I could almost picture them outside, huge, dark shapes circling, waiting for their moment. The air inside felt heavy. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but where? There was nowhere to go. The woods were thick, and in the dead of night, I'd be lost in minutes. And even if I tried to flee, I knew they'd catch me. No, I was trapped. My only hope was to hold out until sunrise. But then the scratching stopped. I froze, the sudden silence more terrifying than the noise. It was too quiet, unnaturally quiet. Not a single rustle of wind or sound of wildlife outside. My heart pounded in my ears, the only sound in the stillness. And then came the footsteps again. Slow, deliberate, right outside the door. The floorboards on the porch creaked under their weight. I stepped backward, the poker trembling in my hand. My eyes were glued to the door, waiting for it to give way, waiting for whatever was outside to come crashing through. But the door never moved. Instead, a faint whisper filled the room. Soft, indistinct at first, like the wind through the trees. But it was coming from inside the cabin. I spun around. There was nothing. No one. But the whisper grew louder, more insistent. A chill ran down my spine, colder than anything I'd ever felt before. Then I saw it. In the far corner, where the shadows gathered thickest, something moved. A shape, barely visible in the dim light, shifting, watching. A figure, tall and gaunt, its eyes glinting in the dark. It wasn't human. Its skin was black, like the night, and it stood impossibly still, like it had been there all along, just waiting. My breath hitched as I stumbled back, the poker shaking violently in my grip. I felt dizzy, my vision blurring as the figure stepped forward, moving with a slow, deliberate grace. Leave. The voices whispered, but the word felt like a command. My legs wouldn't move, as though the air around me had thickened, trapping me in place. The figure came closer, and the fire in the hearth flickering weakly as it struggled to stay lit. I tried to speak, but my throat tightened, the air growing heavy with the scent of damp earth and the acrid hint of rust and decay. The scratching started again, this time from all around me. Above, below, the walls, the windows. The floorboards groaned under invisible weight. Suddenly, the window behind me shattered. Glass sprayed across the room, and cold air rushed in. I whirled around just in time to see something slip through the broken frame. Something low to the ground, moving too fast to see clearly. My flashlight flickered again, and in the brief burst of light, I caught a glimpse of it. A twisted shape, all fur and teeth, with eyes that burned a fiery red. I screamed, swung the poker wildly, but it passed through empty air. I could hear it, feel it, skittering across the walls. The fire suddenly roared to life, casting long, dancing shadows across the room. In the flickering light, I saw the black figure again, standing with its hand outstretched. Its mouth agape, and from it came the terrible howling. The same howls that had haunted me all night. My body locked up, paralyzed by fear. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. All I could hear was the relentless, mind-numbing howl. Just when I thought the figure had swallowed me whole, there was a sudden jolt. Rough hands grabbed my shoulders, shaking me violently.
Hey, wake up!
I blinked, disoriented, my vision blurred. Dan and Eric were standing in front of me, wide-eyed, pulling me back from the chaos around us. The cabin was in shambles, furniture overturned, glass shattered, and deep scratches etched into the walls.
We came early.
Dan said, his voice shaky.
You were howling, crawling around like some kind of wild animal, throwing things everywhere.
Eric glanced at the scuff marks on his sleeves.
And you tried to scratch us.
I had no recollection of any of it, except for body aches. It just felt like I had a bad dream. I couldn't understand what had just happened, wasn't sure I wanted to.
Ensure your horror fix. Subscribe now, hit that bell to stay notified of new terror-filled releases.